India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has a message for the nation's business community. He says dependence on China for trade must end. EM Jaishankar adds that traders must put national security over issues like price points or cheaper Chinese imports when dealing with your country's rival. Jaishankar's comments follow the revelation that China has eclipsed the United States of America to become India's #1 trading partner, despite the border standoff at the LAC since 2020. But it is not just criticism. Jaishankar also gives an alternate solution to Indian businessmen, which we will tell you shortly. But why are India's imports from China on the rise? Is there a realistic alternative to China for Indian traders? And is this similar to trading with your enemy? Now, firstly, is China India's biggest enemy? Well, that's debatable, but certainly it is India's most powerful and aggressive neighbor, and the nation's defense forces must be capable of facing any challenge from the PLA. Secondly, do India and China want to go to war? Certainly not. Even Prime Minister Modi recently said that the LAC issue must be resolved sooner than later. Thirdly, people-to-people contacts are known to survive even all-out wars, just like the 1914 Christmas truce between English and German soldiers on the front line, or Germany and Europe still buying Russian oil and gas in 2024 despite the ongoing Ukraine war. Similarly, Indo-Chinese diplomatic relations have nosedived due to the boundary dispute and China's territorial expansionist ambitions. But there has surprisingly been a convergence between both the nations on one aspect, which is global trade. India and China are surprisingly witnessing a rise in the value of bilateral trade. In fact, China has acquired the status of India's largest trading partner, narrowly ahead of the United States of America. The significant development prompted a response from the India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who warned the business community on not being too dependent on Chinese imports. Speaking at the Confederation of Indian Industries, or CII's annual business summit recently, he said, and I quote, "If peace and tranquility in the border areas are disturbed, would you do business with someone who has barged into your turf? If a country has gone back on written agreements and is doing something on our borders, how can we then say that the business world will continue as normal?" Unquote. Now, one must wonder, if India-China border dispute was settled and China ends its salami slicing tactics, then would bilateral trade soar even higher? Now, Global Trade Initiative's recent findings reveal that Chinese trade with India surpassed $118 billion in fiscal year 24, narrowly edging ahead of the United States. From 2019 to 2024, India's exports to China have stagnated at around $16 billion annually, while imports from China have surged from $70.3 billion in 18-19 to over $101 billion in 2023-24. The data shows a cumulative trade deficit exceeding $387 billion over 5 years. On the other hand, the report showed that exports to the United States dipped by 1.3% to $77.5 billion in 23-24 as against $78.5 billion in 2022-23, while imports dipped by around 20% to $40.8 billion. Official data reveal that India clogged a trade deficit with 9 out of its top 10 trading partners. But what has led to India's huge trade deficit with China, and why is it only getting worse? India is dependent on Chinese industrial goods like telecom, machinery and electronics. New Delhi's imports in this area rose from 21% to a whopping 30% in the last 50 years. China's exports to India are growing 2.3 times faster than India's total imports from all other countries. China alone accounts for more than 5% of India's total imports. A rising overall trade deficit is an alarming concern for an emerging economy like India. Bilateral trade with a neighbor is not the issue, but over-reliance on a trading partner's crucial supplies certainly is. Jaishankar attributed Indian traders' mindset of focusing too much on price points or cheap products as the main reason behind the long-standing trade imbalance between the both countries. But the pressing question to ask is, what can India do to reduce this trade imbalance? Jaishankar went on to provide a smart solution to the problem while pushing for self-reliance and Make in India. He urged Indian businesses to focus on local sourcing in medium to long term. He said, and I quote, "We will have to encourage production in India while encouraging sourcing locally. It's going to be a long and painful process because we are making up for 20 to 30 years of neglect." India is already exploring a wide array of options to level the playing field for domestic manufacturers. India has increased import duties on over 500 items since 2016. Even in the Union Budget 2020, import duty was hiked on toys. Multi-billion enterprises like chemicals, automotive components, bicycle parts, agro-based items and related commodities, handicrafts, drug formulations, cosmetics, consumer electronics and leather-based goods can easily take over and become effective import substitution tools for domestic traders. India is dubbed as the pharmacy of the world, and it's the third largest manufacturer of medical drugs on the planet. To reduce its dependence on China of pharmaceutical ingredients, the government kickstarted 32 plants across India which had begun production of 35 APIs by 2022. Now, this is expected to lower dependence on China by up to 35% before the end of this decade. Anti-dumping investigations have focused on products such as printed circuit boards or type of toughened glass imported from China, aluminium goods, and even chemicals. Sources told the Economic Times in March that the government is mulling ramping up investigations to weed out unfair practices on a wide array of imports from China and elsewhere. But can India find quality alternatives to cheaper Chinese imports? India has been trying to shift its trade strategy from east to the west as it explores signing free trade agreements with major global economies. Negotiations are underway with countries such as the United States, UK, Australia, Japan, Peru, Chile, and even ASEAN countries. In the next few years, India will have FTAs in place with all major economies except China. India needs to diversify and foster economic partnerships with like-minded nations. It is on path of its strategic realignment with nations like Korea, Japan, the UK, and the United States. It's a part of India's broader ambition to enhance its technological capabilities and innovation-driven industries. Reducing the trade deficit is part of a bigger process. It becomes even more imperative to align India's trading strategies with emerging geopolitical situations and political risks to safeguard its supply chains. But can the business community neglect cheaper price for the nation? An anti-China rhetoric gained momentum after the death of 20 soldiers at the LAC in a face-off, which also resulted in the first Chinese deaths in combat in decades. This prompted a ban on certain Chinese apps and products and projections that Indian retailers would scout for local alternatives to replace Chinese goods under the Vocal for Local initiative launched in 2020. However, as imports from China have only increased, this points to a feeling within the business community that the current LAC face-off will not spiral out of control nor lead to a wider conflict. However, Jaishankar emphasizes on focusing on national security while making business-related decisions with China. Meanwhile, China is ecstatic with its growing exports to India. Chinese Chargé d'Affaires Ma Jia said in February that the growth in trade between the two countries went along with other areas of improvement in bilateral ties. Have your say. How can Indian businesses reduce dependence on cheaper Chinese imports and help the nation reduce its trade deficit with China? Leave a comment below, hit the like button, and remember to subscribe to Inconnect News.